There's different things for different days, a lot of events, going to a lot of events, giving a lot of speeches. When the legislature is doing their job, interacting with members of the legislature, having been a former legislator, you know, I kind of speak that language. Acting at times as an interpreter between the legislative and executive branch. And a lot of phone calls, fielding phone calls and helping people out with their issues. It's a big state, a lot of people, 20.7 million people. Yeah. Well, right now, I've been working on something that I have been working on for, unfortunately, far too long, which is something very close to home, Coconut Grove Playhouse. The Miami-Dade County and FIU have a lease with the state of Florida that they had approved in August of 2013. It is now nearly 5 years later, and frankly, I've said this publicly before, I'm extremely disappointed in the lack of action, the lack of movement, the lack of the ability to keep to the deadlines that the county and FIU agreed to with the state of Florida. And it was a process to get the state of Florida to take that property back from a non-for-profit that was running it and literally ran it into the ground, shut the doors, and it was boarded up. It still is boarded up. The state took it back, made this deal with the county and FIU. We were hoping that that would lead to a revival of the Coconut Grove Playhouse, and unfortunately, it still hasn't. So I've been working a lot on that, and then working with the leaders in the county and the Department of Transportation to hopefully find a transportation project that the state can start its process to fund. And that is already in the works, but until the county finds or decides on what mode of transportation that it is the preferred mode for the SMART plan that has been talked about a lot, the next phase of actually getting state funding, which exists. I mean, the state transportation fund is at its highest level it's been in the history of the state, over $10 billion. So the funding is there. It's just a matter of the county leadership picking a mode of transportation and then going for the next step. It started when I was working with my family in their bookkeeping, tax consulting business. I was servicing clients, helping them navigate the somewhat bureaucratic process of dealing with government, getting occupational licenses, certificate of use and occupancy, you know, that board that every business has in their some room that has all those little pieces of paper from the government organizations that have jurisdiction over what they do, and seeing the frustration play out on the faces of people that had to do it on their own, had to deal with it, weren't familiar with the process, and I enjoyed helping people. So I got involved in politics in 1996, volunteering on a campaign for president for Bob Dole. I had just graduated from the University of Miami. My degree was in business. It was a business degree, but at the time they had a major of political science. So it was a political science degree from the business school. And ironically, I even tell students to this day when I speak to them, who are very eager to say that they're political science majors, I tell them, from my experience, I used my education in business more in my public service career than I ever used the political science. So after I graduated, volunteered, and that led me to a job in the legislature, worked there for 6 months, moved to Tallahassee, lived there for 6 months, worked in the process, and decided that that was where I wanted to make my mark, to get involved. And that was 97, ran for a political office in 2002, ran for the Florida House of Representatives, was unsuccessful in my first campaign, and subsequently was elected in 2004, served 8 years, and then went to property appraiser and now lieutenant governor. Don't take anything for granted. Looking back, it was one of the things in my life that has proven to me that everything happens for a reason. At the time, I mean, the day after the election in 2002, I was so devastated, having invested almost my entire life for 6 months, a significant amount of money from my savings, and couldn't understand. I mean, it was devastating at the moment, but 16 years later, I realized it was the best thing that could have happened, primarily because between 2002 and 2004 is when I met my wife. And that she's the greatest thing in my life, my wife and my two daughters. And I don't know if I would have gotten elected in 2002 if I would have been at the very place I was the night that I met my wife, because it was a random meeting. It wasn't like we were set up, mutual friends. I was at a place and she was there, and one thing led to another, and we interacted and got to talking and dating and engaged and married. At times, it is easy to overlook from a local level that this is a very large state with multiple large metropolitan areas. And at times it feels like, especially in Southeast Florida, that the governments operate independently of what's going on, even in the next county at times. An example played out recently in the debate over the American Dream Mega Mall that's going to be built in Northeast Dade. And it played out at the last minute, kind of between Broward and Miami-Dade, and Broward threatened litigation because they claimed Dade County had not taken certain traffic impacts into consideration, and that's literally on the county line, on the northern county line of Miami-Dade County. So that's an example of how sometimes it feels like the governments, especially down here, are not cognizant of what's going on in the rest of the state. Tampa and Orlando seem to be very much aware of what the other is doing. And in Tampa, you have dynamics. You have the city of Tampa, and you have St. Pete. And those are two different entities with two different political hierarchies, two different populations. I mean, you definitely don't want to tell somebody from St. Pete that they're from Tampa, or somebody from Tampa that they're from St. Pete. And that dynamic, having now been in a statewide office, you get exposed to those idiosyncratic things that are geographically specific. Big issues like, for instance, the Bright Line. That train is somewhat, if not very popular here in South Florida. But you go 5 counties up the East Coast, and it is the opposite. It is extremely unpopular. And that dynamic is sometimes lost on geographic areas or leaders, because it's not a knock on them, it's just maybe a lack of exposure to the different perspectives on these issues. And I'm humbled and grateful to have had the opportunity to serve in a statewide capacity and see these dynamics and see what the different areas of the state are talking about, what is motivating their dialogue amongst their political leadership, and what is driving their economic development and what is driving their infrastructure investment.